All right, in this video we are finishing chapter 6, and specifically we are dealing with the idea of finishing off talking about the pricing system. So far we've talked about the pricing system from the standpoint of supply and demand being used to determine what prices should be through equilibrium. And then we talked about the idea of rationing, and that if we're not going to use pricing. We could potentially do rationing. But we also looked at the problems with that and that there's inherent problems with rationing. So now, if we're not going to do rationing and we want the government to get involved, and there's a lot of people that complain about the price of things, particularly things like gas. They say the government should get involved, should do something about this. Well, one thing that they could potentially do is what we call a price ceiling. Now, a price ceiling is a maximum legal price that can be charged for a product. So just like the ceiling in the room, you can't go any higher than the ceiling. So I'll give you, for instance, I'll give you an example. Let's look at the case of apartments. Now, in very large cities like New York, San Francisco, Chicago, Seattle, most people live in apartments. Okay, so there's an example of apartments. Now, what happens though is that in these large cities, you have equilibrium determining what the price of the apartments should be. So we will say that the equilibrium is determined to be about $1,200 a month rent. And now that's $1,200 a month rent for a crappy studio apartment. For those that don't know, studio apartments are like a one room apartment. There is your kitchen, your living room, your dining room, your bedroom, all is one room. The only other walls you have in your apartment is you'll have walls for the bathroom. That's it. Okay, so that's $1,200 a month rent for that. Okay, now people look at that and they say that's unacceptable. That is way too high. People cannot afford that. So they say the government should get involved. They should do something about this. Okay, so what the government's going to do is they're going to set what they call a price ceiling. Now, the price ceiling, if you think about it, is that it's the maximum legal price. Now, if we already said that the $1,200 a month rent is too high, okay, where are we going to set the price ceiling? Well, we're going to set it below equilibrium. So our price ceiling is going to be below equilibrium. It's going to be $1,000. $1,000 a month rent. Okay, so just like the ceiling in a room, you can go anywhere below this, but you cannot go above that $1,000. So you cannot reach equilibrium because it prevents you from doing that. Now the other thing is that this is not a new equilibrium. There is only one equilibrium. The one equilibrium is where supply and demand meet. At $1,000, they do not meet here. Matter of fact, this creates a problem. We know that any price below equilibrium is going to create an inherent problem. What happens? Well, below equilibrium, we're going to have a shortage. And in this case, we're going to have a shortage of apartments. So we're going to have people out there that want an apartment in the city but can't get one. If you've ever seen the old movie When Harry Met Sally, it's on cable all the time. If you have never seen it, it's a good movie. It's a little rom-com, but it's got Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan. It's a little dated. It's from the 80s, but it follows them as they move to New York City. And there's a part of the movie that's talking about Billy Crystal. His character is getting got a divorce, and he's talking about how everybody keeps telling him that, well, at least in the divorce you got the apartment. And he makes the joke that, it's not that hard to find an apartment in the city. He says all you have to do is look in the obituary section. He says what they should do to make it easier is they should combine the obits and the real estate section. So Mrs. Johnson died of natural causes, leaving behind 3 children and 8 grandchildren in a lovely 2-bedroom apartment overlooking Central Park. So this is, obviously a kind of a play on that idea of that there's a shortage. Okay, now One example of this is what we call rent control. Now, not all apartments in a city are rent controlled. There are apartments that will be some apartments in specific apartments in the building. Not all apartments in the same building are going to be rent controlled. But the way it works is that basically they have a rent control board that will decide what the rent control should be, what the price should be. And they will decide what the price should be, and then they will go and set that price, and it will increase a little bit over time, but not a whole lot. Okay, so there are controversies with this. So controversies include, I will show you this. I've got a short little video clip to show you. Or not.
What we're doing is we're mobilizing against Prop 98, which would eliminate all rent control in San Francisco.
It's do or die. I mean, when you look for an apartment that you can afford for 6 months and sleep on friends' couches or sublet rooms, you know what it means to not be able to find a place in San Francisco. If you can't find a place now, what will it be like if you lose rent control?
Rent control didn't just come about overnight. It came because of struggles, and it came because renters were rising up and saying, I'm sick of being oppressed, I need some rights. I'm sick of being kicked out for no reason. That's why we have just cause eviction, and we can't lose that. We can't turn back the clock.
In California, over a dozen cities have rent control laws, while over 100 cities and counties have similar laws for mobile homeowners. But what does rent control really do? In most cases, it restricts rent increases to a small percentage each year. When the tenant moves out, landlords can bounce rents back to market rates. Whether such regulation is ultimately good, and whom it benefits, is up for debate and at the heart of two competing propositions in an upcoming special state election. Both Proposition 98 and 99 are about reeling in eminent domain laws, but only 98 would also eliminate rent control in all of California.
One of the questions people have asked me is where eminent domain and rent control tie in together, and I think they're both really core parts of what a lot of people feel the ethics of America really are, which is freedom in a lot of different ways. Freedom to do what you'd like with your property, and freedom to not have your property taken from you. So I guess in that regard, it's almost the same thing. I'd really prefer if people don't tell me what to do with my property, and I'd prefer if people don't, take it from me unnecessarily.
They're very connected in that way, aren't they? So we bought the building and lived in it, and we've been keeping it up, and it's a lot of work, but we really want to help affordable housing, but having dealt with the rent board for many years, we feel that it's a broken system.
What is an inordinate burden to me is continuing to help people who make, for example, $100,000+ salaries per year and yet live in a rent-controlled apartment. On the whole, I suspect that the number of people who actually need it, if they were given that help, it would amount to less of a subsidy than what's happening right now under rent control.
I arrived here September of 1977, so almost 31 years. And my rent is still under $400. Actually, it's $374.59. I think the market rate, if I were to come in now, would start at $1,003 or $1,350 at least. In fact, what I make with the Social Security and pension plan would not pay the market rent. So I just wouldn't eat.
That type of information is out there scaring people into thinking that they're going to be kicked out of their homes onto the street when in reality their rights don't change.
If 98 passes, those currently under rent control would be grandfathered in. But once they move out, rent increases for that and all future vacancies would remain unregulated. Opponents of 98 claim that the proposition weakens renter protections, while giving landlords greater economic incentive to push tenants out who are currently under rent control.
If there's enough of a buzz and people actually hear how scary this is, a lot of it is getting people to like call their family members and friends in other parts of the state. Now, San Francisco's in the bag, but it isn't in the bag if we don't get people to actually vote. Like, that's the problem, is that in San Francisco, everyone supports this, but how many of them will actually vote in an off-season election?
98 would just be devastating. Economically, it would turn San Francisco into a city of the wealthy.
After someone reads both propositions and really understands what both do, an overwhelming number switch to Proposition 98.
I'm feeling confident that we can beat this thing.
Okay, so what I wanted you to be able to get out of this is that, and I lost my, what I wanted you to be able to get out of this is that the idea of rent control is out there. It is controversial because obviously, as the video pointed out, is that there are a lot of people that depend on it, but it does create a permanent shortage. The other thing is that the guy in the video that is talking about his rent and his being under $400 for the last 30 plus years. Okay, look around his apartment. His apartment really hasn't changed since the 1970s. His landlord has no incentive to go and update his apartment. Okay, that's a problem. That's a controversy. They only do the minimum upkeep. There are landlords that are losing money here, and if they had the choice, they would take their apartment and they would probably turn it into something like office space because they could actually get money off from it. So that's kind of one of the controversies behind price ceilings. So next video, we'll talk about price floors.